Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of our video PowerPoint series for Unit 8, Evolution. Today, what we'll be talking about is primarily evidence for evolution, speciation, and macroevolution. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. So I will see you on the next slide. So the first thing we need to discuss here is the evidence that supports evolution. There's a wide variety of different pieces of evidence here, which is why we consider evolution a theory, not a hypothesis. The first is the fossil record. The fossil record allows us to see changes in organisms over time by looking at what they used to look like and comparing them to now. Anatomical record, so by comparing body structures. So we're talking about homology and vestigial structures, so similar structures and structures that are no longer there or have no use, as well as embryology and development, so how the organism develops over time. We can also look at the molecular record, so comparing the protein and DNA sequences to see how many similarities there actually are in its code. And we also have artificial selection, which is human-caused evolution, or selecting different traits for different organisms, such as with dog breeds. So, homologous structures. We're talking about evidence for divergent evolution, or paths branching off. These are structures that come from the same origin. So homo means same, logos meaning information, so homologous, we're just talking about the same information. Primarily, we're talking about the forelimbs of humans, cats, whales, and bats. So if you go ahead and bring your attention down here, right below me, what you can see is we have this bone that is highlighted. Now, this bone is identical in humans, cats, whales, and bats. Even though it might be a different size, it's all the same bone. So it's the same structure on the inside and same development inside the embryo. So it's going to develop the same way. However, these all serve different functions. For example, the forearm on a human used to go ahead and provide movement, specifically connecting your upper and lower arm. The cat, once again, used for movement. The whale, used for swimming. The bat, used for flight. So, homologous structures, we're talking same structure, but a different function. And this supports evidence of a common ancestor. So at one point, the human, the cat, the whale, and the bat all had a similar ancestor. So if you went back far enough, you could find one. However, do not be fooled, swindled, nor bamboozled by what you're about to see. Now, we have a dragonfly and we have a hawk, right? These would be analogous structures. Specifically, we're talking about their wings. So it's true that a hawk and a dragonfly both have wings. So they have the same structure on the outside. They look the same function. However, there is a different structure in development. So if you think about this, it's the same function, both are used for flight, but the way they develop and the actual structure on the inside are different. Hence, they have a different origin. So there is no recent evolutionary relationship. So if we look at this, think of the inside. The inside of a hawk's wing is going to have bone and muscle. Whereas the dragonfly is going to have more exoskeleton, more chitinous bits. So different structure, but the same function is analogous, and that shows no evolutionary relationship. So what do you think? We have a dolphin, and we have a wide variety of different fish. Would these be analogous or homologous? So dolphins are an aquatic mammal, where fish are aquatic vertebrates. They're both adapted to life in the sea, however, they are not closely related. They have similar structures, but different functions. So, convergent evolution, analogous structures. So convergent is evolving similar solutions to similar problems. So we have three groups of wings: a bat, a hawk, and a dragonfly. Does this mean they had a recent common ancestor? All three of them? Probably not. So Convergent evolution, converging to the same point, means evolving similar solutions to similar problems. All three needed to fly, and sure enough, they have the structures to do that, specifically that offer the same function. But the development's a lot different. Now, if we were to compare the bat and the hawk, then maybe we'd be getting somewhere. So, speciation. Speciation is a theory that species can change over time to become different groups because of isolation, mutations, and evolution. So, what we're talking about here is all of these birds, even Gonzo over here, probably all shared a similar ancestor. But over time, and depending on where they lived and what specific challenges were met at where they live, they changed to adapt to that. So, same thing. It's no stretch to see that a domestic cat and a leopard probably had a common ancestor at one point. But if you go back even further, is it so outlandish to say that maybe a wolf, a leopard, and a domestic cat had the same ancestor? I mean, similar development, similar bone structure, similar movement patterns. It's not that hard to think. So, a species. A species is just a group of organisms that can successfully reproduce and have viable offspring. So, what we mean here is the offspring can also reproduce. There are some organisms that can reproduce from separate species, but the offspring cannot reproduce. So, to be considered a different species, the two organisms must be able to mate and produce viable offspring. So, speciation requires a few things: either isolation, a mutation, or evolution to occur. To split species, so to go ahead and branch off from one path to the next and create a split here in the organisms, one of these three things has to occur: either isolation, mutation, or evolution. So first, let's talk about isolation, specifically reproductive isolation. So speciation, we know, requires reproductive isolation. So if the two cannot mate, they are considered different species, right? So cannot mate or can mate and not produce viable offspring, two different species. So reproductive isolation can be prezygotic, meaning that the mating or fertilization is prevented, so it stops the egg and the sperm from ever meeting, or postzygotic. So a hybrid zygote can form, but it may die early, be too weak to survive, or sterile, meaning that it can't reproduce. So the first type of prezygotic isolation we're going to discuss is geographical, or separated by a habitat. For example, if the organism is small enough, this could be land, grass, a tree maybe, or it could be things like water, a mountain, a valley, an ocean. So, for example, we have one squirrel over here, one squirrel over here. Unfortunately, no matter how much these two may go ahead and fall for each other, may feel the love tonight, there's kind of a gap, and it's a pretty big one. So, no matter what, these two aren't going to be able to get to each other. Sorry, once again, this is science, not a Disney movie. So geographical, separated by habitat. The next type is temporal, or temporal, being separated by time. So for example, nocturnal versus diurnal, so being awake at night or being awake during the day. Also, they could have different reproductive seasons. So for example, let's say a certain toad goes ahead and reproduces in the spring and another reproduces in the fall. Those two would never go ahead and reproduce with each other because the mating seasons are different. Same thing here. This owl on the left is nocturnal, whereas the one on the right is awake during the day. So there's a very small chance that these two would ever actually reproduce. The third type is behavioral. So for example, there's a mating song or dance involved. For example, these two albatrosses down here, There's an elaborate courtship kind of ritual, a little dance they have to do. Now, if one of them screws this dance up, that's it. It ruined its shot of mating for that mating season. So, if you thought you had it bad, consider it like this. If you screwed up one small thing in a dance or a song, that means you wouldn't be able to reproduce for that season. That's kind of a heavy hit there. Also mechanical. Physically, it does not fit. They mechanically cannot mate. For example, let's say, here we go. So what we're talking about here, mechanical doesn't fit. Square peg, round hole. No matter how much you try to force it, it's not going to fit. So, let's take a look at what we have here. If you go ahead and look over here, or maybe it's over here, whichever way, what we have is a mule. Thank you. So a mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. So a horse mates with a donkey. Are they the same species? No. So unfortunately, what this means is mules cannot create more mules. Mules, most of the time, are sterile. So, sorry, you can't cross two mules together. Now what about a horse and a zebra? No, that's not photoshopped. So a horse and a zebra, same thing. Two different species, they may be able to reproduce, but the offspring is infertile. They cannot reproduce. So maybe that's a zebroid or perhaps a zorse. Now how about a donkey and a zebra? Oh yeah, that creates a zonkey. Zonkey! Now, unfortunately, once again, cannot reproduce to make more zonkies. How about a dolphin and an orca? What do you think? I mean, they're both mammals, live in the water, maybe? That can actually happen. So, they call them wolfins, but personally, I don't like that. I don't call them wolfins. I call them dorcas. Dolphin Orca. Dorca. Long story short, same thing. Unfortunately, cannot reproduce. Now, here we go. The old adage. Lions and tigers. Are they the same species? No. But you can reproduce them. To get a liger or a tigon. So a liger would be a male lion, female tiger, and a tigon would be a male tiger, female lion. Now, some of these things, when they go ahead and they actually have offspring, the tigon specifically, the tigons are gigantic. Like, they're twice the size you think they should be. But still, you cannot cross a liger and a liger or a tigon and a tigon to get offspring. Sorry. Now, macroevolution. So how do we get from a mechanism of speciation to evolution on a grand scale? So splitting species to evolving. We have two different models of this. There's gradualism, where there's a slow, gradual change with an accumulation of unique morphological adaptations. So over time, a bunch of small, tiny changes until the two eventually split. Or you could go via punctuated equilibrium, where a rapid change occurs, resulting in a new species erupting from the ancestral lineage and then staying the same thereafter. So it'd be like blue butterfly, blue butterfly, blue butterfly, poof, purple butterfly. And then now we have two, a blue and a purple. So, like I said before, on the left here, we have gradualism. So as you can see, many small changes that eventually lead to two separate species. On the right here, we're talking more punctuated equilibrium. So, same, poof, different. Then it keeps going same, poof, different. So in the end, we have 3 separate species. So what we also need to discuss here is something called selection. And there are 3 types. We have directional, stabilizing, or disruptive. So a directional selection is going to choose one trait over the other. So it's a shift in one direction. So one extreme is selected over the other. Stabilizing means the intermediate form or the middle ground. Think of it like this. When you want to stabilize a situation, you want to find the middle ground or the common ground between the two. So most of the time these would be the hybrids. The hybrid form or intermediate form of the trait is selected. So most of the population is average, and it's not very advantageous to have an extreme. The final type is disruptive. So with disruptive, we're talking extremes here. Both extreme forms are good to have. However, the middle trait or the middle ground is selected against. Now, we'll talk about this in a second. I'll show you actual examples. So let's get to it. So if you would be so kind as to go ahead and draw what you see here. Specifically, the directional, stabilizing, diversifying, or disruptive, and the regular chart. So while you're working on this, I'm just going to take a little swig of water. Dead bit parched. That's the ticket. Now, if you still need to go ahead and work on this, please pause the video. No, actually pause the video. I'll be here when you get back. I'll see you on the next slide. So with what we have here, take a look. Initially, we have white, light blue, and purple. And we also have intermediate forms. So blue is the middle ground, white is one extreme, purple is the other. So over time, it looks like we're selecting more of the purple, and the very light blue and the white have been kind of knocked off. This is what we would call directional selection. So one extreme, in this case purple, is chosen over the other. So what do we have here? It looks like over time, the white as well as the purple are slowly dying off. Whereas the middle, the light blue, seems to be thriving. This is what we would call stabilizing. Because as you can see here, the middle ground is the best type to have. How about this one? So over time, the light blue seems to be decreasing, but the white and the purple have increased exponentially here. That would be our disruptive or extreme. Now, if you look close, there's actually 2 moths in each of these pictures. Can you see them? Let me help you out. So this one, pretty easy to find, right? However, this guy, the white moth, a little bit more complex to actually see. And down here, same thing. White moth is pretty easy to find, but the dark color blends in pretty well. So what do you think? It's either very advantageous to be the white variety or the dark variety. This would be our directional selection once again. So the final couple of topics we need to talk about here are adaptive radiation. So adaptive radiation is when one species increases in number without competition and evolves into a new species in a new environment. So what we're talking about here is, considering that each of these different birds have a different beak for eating a different type of food, there's not really a lot of competition. So that allows them to go ahead, reproduce, thrive, and survive. So over time, the species number will increase. Now, on the other hand, we have extinction. Ah, dinosaurs. You have my respect. So extinction would be the irrevocable loss of a species, usually followed by adaptive radiation of other species. So, think about the dinosaurs. Meteor hits, wipes them all out. Unless we're talking like John Hammond, you can't really bring them back. You can't really bring back the dinosaurs. So once they're extinct, that's it, man. Game over. Game over, man! They're not coming back. So the final thing we want to talk about today is artificial selection. And this occurs when humans select traits that survive and proliferate, or selective breeding. So humans go ahead and breed the organisms for a specific trait. Now this could be for, in cattle, more muscle mass, larger horns, or specifically the most popular version of this has to do with this picture. So, we got a dog over here, this little guy. We have a woman, and then we also have another, wait a minute. That's a dog. So we have two dogs here, one very tiny, one is quite gigantic. Speaking of gigantic dogs, what we have here are dog breeds. So different dogs were bred for specific purposes. Maybe like a bloodhound, smell, the dachshund, used for going ahead and hunting, getting stuff out of foxholes, beagles, once again known for their hunting, huskies, sled dogs. So each one has a specific purpose and was bred to go ahead and accentuate those traits. So, what kind of dog do you like? Really? I wouldn't have pegged you for that kind of a dog type. I'm kidding, I unfortunately can't hear anything you're saying. But, me, I was always a big fan of the Welsh Corgi, for very specific reasons. Much like the Welsh Corgi, I can relate. I too have short, stubby little legs. So, ladies and gents, that's about going to go ahead and close us down for today. So I know we talked about a lot, so make sure you go back and review the notes that we took today. So in short, what we talked about was what speciation is, or how different organisms can split and become different species over time, as well as what can cause that. So, like I said before, please make sure you go back and review what we talked about today, look it over a couple of times, and bring any questions you have to class. So, with that said, I will see you in the next video. You all keep it classy now.